Okay, your teacher is running late today. So,
He does on.
I have some questions. Please raise your hand if you know the answer.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, here you go. What fruit the size of an orange is embroidered around the edge of the high priest's robe? And I didn't raise your hand. David.
Pomegranate.
Pomegranate, thank you. Okay, good. All right. Palm Sunday commemorates which event in Jesus' life? Cal.
The triumphal entry.
Good. All right.
I thought that book went with Nathan.
No, I didn't. He left it. So, there's different ones too. All right. What caused the plant that was shading Jonah to die? Michael.
A worm.
Good. A worm ate it. According to Matthew's gospel, who bought the potter's field? What? David?
It was actually the people of the Sanhedrin that bought it.
Good. The Pharisees and the Sanhedrin bought it. Good. Where'd they get the money from? Cal?
The 20 pieces of silver that
30, wasn't it?
30.
Okay. Okay. In ancient Israel, with which oil were the kings and priests anointed? Karen?
Probably
Good. Olive oil. And who had an almond rod that flowered and produced fruit overnight? Rick.
Aaron.
Aaron. Who was Aaron's brother?
Moses.
Yeah.
Hands, please. Mary.
Moses.
Thank you. Who was Aaron and Moses' sister? Oh, wow, you guys know that. Okay, Mark.
Mary.
Who?
Miriam.
Miriam. Yeah. Good. All right. Here we go. Okay, 50-50 chance here. Okay. True or false? Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the fields. Karen.
True.
Took the chance, that's good. 50-50. All right. According to Paul's teaching to Timothy, who should be the first to receive a share of the crops? Judy.
God.
No. Rick.
Farmer.
Yes. The farmer. Okay. In Psalm 23, what type of pastures does the Lord make the writer to lie down in?
Green.
Hands. Bob.
Green.
Thank you. What did the serpent tell Eve would happen if she ate the forbidden fruit? Cal.
Well, first she would not surely die, and then she would become like God.
Good. According to Isaiah, what building stands in the vineyard? Ooh. Rick?
Watchtower.
Watchtower, good. All right. Talking of the church, Paul says, I planted the seed, and who does he say watered it? We had a discussion about this one the other day, but Karen.
Is it Apollos?
Yeah, Apollos, not Apollo. Apollo was the god, right? All right. And in which Old Testament book do we find the words, a time to plant and a time to reap? Mary.
Ecclesiastes?
Good. In Genesis, a cherubim and a flaming, flashing sword guarded the way to which tree? Judy.
The tree of knowledge and...
Nope. Mark.
Tree of life.
Yes. All right. And what type of tree in Gethsemane is the most famous? Karen? Thank you. Hands, please. Aha. When Abram and Lot separated, which way did Lot go? Cal?
East,
East. To where? The valley of what?
the Jordan River.
Well, I think it had a name.
Oh, Hannah.
No. I'm just going by memory here. My memory's failing, so. Wasn't it Shinar?
No.
The valley of Shinar? I just read that. Okay, I'll have to look that one up. What happened to Lot's wife when she looked back? Richard. Yes, she did. My mom turned around and looked back, and she turned into a telephone pole. All right. Okay. I just had to throw that one.
Sounds like we lost weight.
I'll punish you for that.
In John 12, what must a grain of wheat do to produce many seeds?
Die.
Hand, please. Cal.
It has to die.
Thank you. Let's see. At the Passover, this is a good one. At the Passover, what plant did Moses use to sprinkle blood on the doorposts of homes? Richard? No. Nope. And Karen? Hyssop. True or false? 50-50 here. Jesus asked the people whether they had gone out into the desert to see sand blown by the wind. Mary, that's false. What did they go out into the desert to see? A man in fine robes? No. A man in, I forget the other stuff. Anyway, we'll back up here.
It's in there
A
somewhere.
reed blown by the wind.
A reed blown by the wind, that's right. Okay. What did Jesus say must be done to the strong man before anyone can enter his house and carry off his possessions? Mary,
Them,
you do what?
find him,
Yes, bind him up. Okay. Who said this to the Syrophoenician woman? First let the children eat all they want, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Nobody else? Nobody else? Judy, who said that?
Didn't hear the question.
All right. Cal,
It was Jesus.
it was Jesus. All right. And what type of person did Jesus allow to cast the first stone at the woman caught in adultery? David.
He who without sin.
Yeah, the one without sin. Okay. Which Jewish prophet who lived in the time of Ahab is mentioned in the last chapter of the book of Malachi? Ooh. Rick. Elijah. Who was the righteous and most famous king of Israel descended from Ruth? Karen.
David,
David. Yes, and what was Ruth's mother-in-law's name? Mark.
Naomi.
Yes. All right. Which rich and powerful man did Ruth marry? Judy. Too late. Who? Boaz. Okay, thank you. Bull what? Yeah, okay. And there we go. And from which people were Ruth descended? David. Moabite. She was a Moabite. Good. Who was the other famous woman, I guess, that wasn't Jewish? That was in the line of Jesus.
Rahab.
Thank you.
Mary.
Couldn't pull the-
Rahab. Hand, please. All right. Who was Israel's first anointed king? Yes,
Saul.
Saul. What was Saul's physical feature about him that made him, so famous? Yes, Karen. He was tall. He stood head and shoulders above. Okay. And who was king over Israel when the confrontation with Goliath occurred? Cal.
Saul.
What was the name of Saul's daughter whom he gave to David as his first wife? Mary.
Is it
Micah. Yes. Which of David's wives had once been married to Nabal? Well, Rick. Abigail. Okay, here's one. True or false? 50-50. Mephibosheth was related to David.
What was the name?
Mephibosheth.
Easier for you to say.
Mephibosheth. Karen. False. He was not. Who was Mephibosheth related to? Mark?
He was a priest.
No. Mary? Jonathan. What was it about Mephibosheth that probably was most his prominent feature? Judy?
When when his nurse was carrying him, when they were running away, she dropped him and he was lame.
That's correct. Thank you. All right. I have to think about these myself. Maybe somebody else knows this one. I'd have to look. Which Philistine king did David serve under? Rick. Okay. And where was the city that Abimelech resided in?
Thanks, Bob. Doing the Q&A for everybody?
I am.
Are
So-
they winning?
No, but here's your question. What city did Abimelech, who was king of the Philistines, what city was he from? Where?
Greera?
Really? I'm not sure. I thought it was Gath. I thought it was Gath, but
Don't know that because that's what we're studying today.
no.
Abimelech, yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Well, you're probably studying a different Abimelech. This is the Philistine.
Yeah, the king.
Oh, okay.
Made a covenant with Abraham.
No,
and
this
with
is a lot later. This is with
Oh,
David.
Abimelech the third or fourth or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Well, cool. Thank you, Bob.
Oh, yeah. They were just all over the place. They were talking, fighting, they were throwing
I'm
papers.
not surprised. I want to know if we made enough copies. I got 2, 3, 5, 7, 8. We're really close. I may have to make some more copies, but less copies for that. So-
Brexville's books are up there too, do you see that in front?
I do. I appreciate that. So, being that we got to make this expeditious. So, I printed out next week's reading schedule. So, we'll pass those along. I'll let you two share because I may be
Yes,
short.
you bet.
Here,
Well, here, Dave,
if I
I
end
mean,
short.
Rex, we
Okay.
got two.
I'll catch you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
It's gonna be interesting.
We can share.
Yeah. There.
Morning, Jim, how are you?
I agree because I am putting my calendar and out in Google and doing an invite to everybody and then you all have it. Like, yeah, that's gonna happen. So, Eileen has done us a big, huge, gigantic favor. And She got us some binders to put the notes in, because it's going to be pretty lengthy by the time you get done. And so, if you have one, great. If you don't, they're up here to get. And we also have handouts from last week. If you didn't catch it, you can put in the book, okay? That's a good start. Now, let's see how we're doing with my copies. If we need more, well, we'll figure it out. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. I think I enough. Enough, like singular, like I'm going to hit it right on the nose.
Thank you.
Which is good.
I've already read it.
Hello, Amy. Very good. Karen was up too late. Were you up too late last night? She yawned. Yeah.
Cal's got his over there.
Yeah.
All right. Now that the, what do you call that? Administrative stuff is taken care of, we get to the Bible study. 1 second. So I don't go cross-eyed and fall over looking at the paper and looking at everybody out there. We'll just kind of work this on. Let's go and open. Rick, would you open us in prayer?
Sure.
Thank you.
Father God, we just want to thank you for this day. We thank you for the provision of it. We thank you for this time when we can come together for this Sunday school class. Be with us as we get into your word, Lord. I pray that you would give Rex the words to speak. And Father, that you would give us ears and hearts to hear. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yeah, so as we go through the study, last week we covered a lot of territory chronologically, time-wise. From creation up into, we were introduced into Abraham, okay? And so this week we're picking up in Abraham's life in chapter 20, and the Lord willing, we'll get through a good part of Jacob's life in chapter 33. And if you look at the reading program, by next Sunday, you'll have read the book of Genesis, which is, I think, pretty cool. That's a pretty good path. We're going to see here in chapter 21 and 20, Abraham actually repeated failures, but we see God's faithfulness in fulfilling the promise he makes to Abraham. Okay? And it says that Abraham, he was sojourning, he was wandering. He was covering this area that God had called him to. And he went, it said, toward the land of the Negev, and he settled in Gerar, Gerar, okay? Now, while he's there, we see his humanness take over. And as we read this, one of the things to think about is, for the people who wanted to write the Bible, if you were writing a book about your ancestors and you had this story that the Bible presents, you wouldn't put in all these dirty marks, you know? You wouldn't show the failings of your founder. You would minimize them or totally negate them. But we find out that when he gets down there, his humanness is exposed because he has fear and he has a lack of faith. He's in the land because God told him to be there. And God said, if you go there, I'm going to bless you and I'm going to protect you. You don't have to worry. But if you remember what happened in Genesis 12, when there was a famine in the land, what Abraham did? He went down to Egypt, strike one, and then what did he do with Sarah? Anybody remember? Huh?
He told her to be his sister, not his wife.
Right. Yeah, he did it again in chapter 20. He said he doesn't leave for Egypt, but this time he's like, these guys are really heathens up here. I got an idea. You just tell them you're my sister. Far better for you to be taken and abused by somebody else, but at least I won't die. That's kind of the picture.
Wasn't she like 90 years old?
She's probably getting in that area. Yeah, because the promises have been made. She actually has Isaac when she's 90, and Abraham's 100. So she's probably in her 80s, right? She'll make it to 127. He repeats the error of chapter 12. And I guess I take some solace in that, right? Because what it is I can read that and say, well, he's not the only one that makes big mistakes and swears he'll never do it again. And because of fear and lack of faith, you repeat yourself. But the beautiful part is God isn't done with Abraham. Abraham doesn't excuse himself. We don't have that. He doesn't make excuses. But he's confronted by it, right? The king there finds out about it, and he addresses it. Now, if you remember chapter 19, the one we finished with last week, it had to do with Sodom and Gomorrah, and it ended with the story of Lot and his daughters. And I said chapter 19 is a dark chapter. Well, 21 now is one of the brighter ones, particularly in context to Abraham, his story. Because in chapter 21, God fulfills his promise, right, to Sarah and Abraham with a son. His son's name? Isaac. Okay? God, in this chapter, God affirms the fulfillment of his promise to Abraham through Isaac. In other words, right? Your descendants, that issue of your descendants. All these promises, Abraham, go to your descendants because Abraham, like all of humanity, his life will end. Right? He says, the real promise isn't just that you get it today, Abraham, but it's your family, your descendants perpetually. Well, what did he need for a descendant? He had to have a descendant. And so God gives him Isaac. Now Abraham can see God's promise. How is it going to happen? Well, I'm going to have this son. However, in chapter 21, you see the oft-repeated conflict we see throughout the Bible between the children of the world and the children of promise. Okay? So again, put your mind around Abraham. He has two sons now. Who are they?
Abraham and Ishmael.
Ishmael,
Isaac and
Ishmael
Ishmael.
and Isaac. Ishmael would be the child of the world, the son of the flesh, of human effort. Isaac is the son of promise. It's by God. It's the miraculous. And in this chapter, you have Ishmael taunting and picking on Isaac for no other reason than jealousy. Okay? And the conflict continues today. And the conflict between the world and the children of promise will continue until Christ comes. But we're seeing it here for the first time. Well, actually, we saw it with Cain and Abel. It's a never-ending story. So, folks, you're not going to fix the world. Don't form a political action committee to get the right people elected to make the world a much, the Garden of Eden again. It ain't happening until Christ comes. 21 ends with Abimelech, the king, who had kind of caught Abraham deceiving him about Sarah. He basically sees they're blessed, and he makes a covenant with Abraham. He comes to Abraham and says, "You're blessed of God." And we're catching that. And in their mind, they've kind of figured out that he's going to become greater. And he'll be greater and we'll become less. And he says, let's make a covenant between your people and my people, our posterity, forever, to show kindness to one another and not to deal falsely. Isn't it interesting that that's what Abimelech's concerned about? Why was he concerned about that? Abraham had lied to him. And he says, let's make a covenant, but to make this covenant to work, what do we have to be? Honest with one another, okay? And you're going to go your way, and we're going to go our way, but you treat us with kindness like we've treated you. And they had. They had. All right? Now, in chapter 22, we probably have the greatest testing of God of any mere human. He calls on Abraham to offer Isaac, quote, as a burnt offering on one of the mountains. If you think you have faith, if you think that spiritually you're all that in a bag of chips too, you better look at Abraham and say, where do I stand in that one? Okay? All right? Well, what we see is, that in this offering, it's a supreme test of his faithfulness and obedience to Abraham. And it far exceeds his command in the prior chapter to send Ishmael away. Okay? Because in that conflict, Sarah said, get him out of here. He has no part in this family. You get Ishmael out. Abraham resisted. God said to Abraham, listen to your wife and do what she tells you. Why? Because she had the spiritual discernment. Abraham was letting love color his sight. So he had to send Ishmael away, which was hard for him. But in chapter 22, he has a much harder test. He was to offer Isaac. Okay? That Isaac represents all the hope of the future for Abraham. Now, but we learn, knowing your whole Bible, there was a reason Abraham was able to obey God, and it was his faith. Because in Hebrews we're told his faith was based on this belief, it was grounded on this belief that even if he obeyed God's command and he sacrificed Isaac, God possessed the power to, quote, raise people even from the dead. I hope you see as I tell you that a picture and a type of God the Father with Christ and us. Okay? Abraham and Isaac is a type, a representation of what God was going to do. Kind of as though in the human race falling against God, God said, I'm going to have a representative. Adam failed. It's going to be Abraham. Abraham, what are you going to do for me? Offer your son. Okay, I'm going to do that. God says, good. Don't do it. I saw that you're going to do it. Now I'm going to do it. I'm going to offer my son for you, which is what we got in Genesis earlier, right? Here's a great thing I took out of this. I believe the testing was, okay, you understand the testing was not for God. When you read it was for God to see, God did not need to see what Abraham was going to do. Correct? God knew everything, knows all things. He knows everything, right? I find that it's really, God knows us more intimately than we ever do, and Abraham didn't know himself. God's testing is designed to discover for us, to discover truths in us about ourselves that we don't know that God does. Sometimes the testing comes because he's wanting us to see a flaw, a failure that needs to be addressed, that we're oblivious to, we're blind to. Because we're human, and we kind of march along our merry way, think we're all okay. And God brings things into our life for us to go, oh. But I think on the other side, and this is kind of more speaking from personal experience, you go some really hard times for God to show you what's in you that you didn't think you could ever do. But by God's grace, you're able to do it. And it really prepares you for the next time when God calls you to do something, when you think, I can't do that. But this time you're able to say, oh, I know I can do that through God. Yes, Judy?
Well, I'm thinking that Isaac was at least in his teens by then, because this was many years later that God told him to do this. And I'm thinking it took quite a bit of faith on Isaac to climb up on that altar.
More than likely, he was probably older than that. We're not exactly told. Might have been in his late 20s, early 30s. And that is a really significant point. Yeah?
Twice in that passage, he's described as a lad. He's probably more like 10.
Well, when you try, you do the thing. Again, we're not told. But either way, 10-year-old, you know the whole altar thing.
Yeah.
Rick?
We're not told everything that went on during this
Yeah,
experience.
right.
And sometimes people think that Isaac was kind of docile and crawling up on, it says he was bound,
Yeah,
that Abraham bound Isaac.
yes.
I think there was a little struggle there.
And there could have,
Finally got to the point.
yeah. Right. Well, I think the profound statement to me, as they're approaching the mountain and Isaac says, where's the lamb?
Yeah.
What was Abraham's response? God's going to provide, right? And at the end, the focus here is Abraham, obedience. But Hebrews tells us, well, don't think his obedience was, blind faith. He had what does Hebrews tell us faith is?
assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not yet seen.
Yeah, I know what God's going to do. I know what God can do. Nothing shows me that, but I just know it because I know God. See, the key is faith comes from hearing the word and believing it. It's the idea that he knows God. Remember what he said before Sodom? He asked God the rhetorical question, will not the judge of all the earth do right? That's who he knew God. And he knew that this was not God's way, but he also knew that God was more than able. He didn't question the power of God. At the end of in 23, we have Sarah at 127 dying, at which point it means that Isaac is about 37. Okay? The narrative details the profound impact Abraham's life among these foreigners, as it were, he was a foreigner among these people, had, because you see their generosity, their compassion, their grace. And we get to where they offer the tomb for the cave for him to bury Sarah. And the guy's like, what's 400 shekels between you and me? I'm not about to take that from him. And Abraham insists. It kind of reminds me of when they came back and he ran into the king of Jerusalem or Salem and said, hey, you take everything, I'll keep the people. And he says, there's nobody going to say they made Abraham rich. I think part of it was Abraham realized he was going to do everything by the book so that later nobody could intervene and say, hey, that's not your cave. So he insisted at expense to him. It also reminds you of a guy named David. When he bought the sacrificial place to offer the sacrifice, he says, I'm not going to offer God anything that costs me nothing. Right? It's the idea of, I'm going to do what's right. 24, I keep moving here. We see an emphasis from Abraham. We shift from the emphasis in Abraham, who's well advanced in years, to Isaac, because Isaac's been born now. He's the next patriarch in the promised line to Messiah. And folks, that's what we're following. If you haven't caught that, as we look through these lives in Genesis, what we're really doing is taking a line basically from Noah. We're going to lead ourselves, who's the player? How do we follow and know the Messiah when he comes? Okay, that's the idea. So you go from Abraham, the next one in line is Isaac.
Yeah.
Okay? Now Isaac, at this point, is unmarried, we're told. And Abraham's concerned that he does not take a daughter from the Canaanites. Remember, God had told him, this is your land, but these people are going to get judged. He told him that back in Genesis 15. You're not going to be in the land. Your descendants are going to be out of the land for 400 years because the sins of the people is not yet full. And so Abraham wanted to go back. He wanted his son to go back and pick a wife from his hometown, basically from his family. And so he sent his servant, some believe it was his servant Eleazar, who he mentioned prior to Isaac being born. You see the faith of Abraham in that when he sends his servant, the servant says, but what if she doesn't want to come? What if I can't meet anyone? And he says, God will go before you. He's going to prepare it. He's going to take care of you. Because Isaac is a son of promise. And for this to continue, what does Isaac have to do? Reproduce. He has to get married and have children. We need to get him a wife. So he sends him. And as it works out, as the servant arrives, everything just happens. Guess who's at the watering hole? Rebecca. Guess who's doing the thing? He puts, as it were, the proverbial fleece before God. Having less word than we do, he just said, God, here's what I need you to do. I need to know who's the right one. So let's do it this way. She'll come, I'll ask her for water, she'll give me the water, and then she's going to offer to water the camels. That's exactly what Rebecca does. He gives her a gift, and a ring, a nose ring, and bracelet. She runs back and tells Papa, and guess who else was with Papa? Her brother Laban, who sees the gold and says, this is my new best friend. He hightails out of town. He tells the guy, you ain't going nowhere. You're coming home. Because he sees cash. And you will find out, this is the introduction of Laban, this is his character. Technical word, he would be a shyster. Okay? That's what he cares about. And we'll see this probably by the end, before we get done with the study. Chapter 25, we have an interlude. It's an interesting interlude because God tells us that after Sarah's death, that Abraham took a wife. Now, in Chronicles, we're told she's a concubine, Keturah, and through Keturah, he had 6 sons. We're given those sons, and they all become their own, I guess you'd call them, nations in the region, okay? Now, we're not told if this was before or after the death of Sarah, but I take it was kind of, the way it's worded, it seems to me it was like afterwards. But there's a very short time, about 38 years for all this to happen. But here's what's interesting, consistent with the Bible, okay? Verses 12 and 8 through 18 of chapter 25, we're given the lineage of the rejected line again. Why? They're sons of Abraham, 6 of them. And then we have Ishmael, who's the 7th. Because the promise is Isaac. So you have you have sons of Abraham by 3 women. Sarah has 1, Hagar has 1, and Keturah had 6. Okay? And you'll follow through the Bible, it's the idea that the promised line, God comes back to the promised line to pick it up, and he'll talk about Isaac. But what he does here, he talks about Keturah and her sons, and then we're done with them. That's what I mean, we're done with them. Then he tells us, tells us before Abraham dies, he gave gifts to Hagar and to Keturah and to the sons, and he sent them away from Isaac. Okay? He made sure they had theirs, they went their way, and Isaac had the rest. Isaac was the son of promise. Isaac was getting everything that Abraham had for him. And he didn't want conflict, because he'd already seen conflict with Ishmael towards Isaac. Okay? And again, I hope in all this you do catch the subtleness of God gives us his divine objectives, his purposes. Man doesn't always follow them. And when he doesn't, we see the consequences of. Okay? And we'll see this play out even in Rebekah's life. All right? Yeah.
Through Keturah, we do get Midian.
Right. We do get Midian, right? But what we don't have is we don't have the follow of Midian in his life. Midian is a big player in the Old Testament. Okay? And Dedan, they're going to be mentioned a bunch. But when it comes to the promise, and what we're talking about, the real promise is not just that they're in Israel, but it really is the lineage of Christ. That's what we're focused on. What we're looking for in the Bible is, where's Christ? Because Christ is our answer, and that's what the book is about. The culmination comes in the gospel accounts and then the epistles are the training, but that's what we're looking for. Now, in verses 7 and 8, we learn the death and burial of Abraham. He died at 175. Therefore, it seems like Ishmael was 88 and Isaac was 75. Sarah had been dead 38 years. He's buried with Sarah. And what you see, and this is an interesting thing I caught, Ishmael and Isaac came together to bury their father. Well, why? When was Ishmael put out? He was like 13, 14. He's now 88. Folks, you better not be holding on to anything that long. And it says that Ishmael and Isaac came together to bury their father. We have no, again, I'm not trying to read into, but we also don't have any indication there was any animosity towards them. Okay? And I just found it interesting because these guys are still fighting today, and it's like, wait a minute. You guys are fighting over the name Ishmael and Isaac today, and what you guys don't even catch was when your father, both of you, Abraham, died, they came together. It's the children of the world and the children of promise are continuing conflict. Now again, having given Keturah's lineage, Abraham dies. Now we're given Ishmael's lineage, and we're told that he lived to be 137. Ishmael did. Okay, for all intents and purposes, Ishmael is now off the records. We're not going to come back to him. We're moving on to verses 19 through 34. We'll see the faith of Isaac and Rebekah, because they're going to have children. They're going to have twins. Okay? Rebekah, as Sarah, was barren, and it says that Isaac prayed for her, and, quote, the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Now, while she's carrying these children, knowing all she knows is she's pregnant, right? And there's a lot of action going on in their womb, and she can't figure it out. She goes to God, and God tells her, when she went to inquire of him, that she was carrying 2 sons. And God also told her that the first one was going to serve the younger one, and the first one was going to be dominated by the younger one, and moms take that stuff to heart. Okay? And when they were born, the picture was Esau came out, and who was holding his ankle? Jacob, which is deceiver, deceptor, tripper, ankle catcher, something along those lines. But that's how they named him. And they named Esau because he was hairy, and that's what it meant. He was a fuzzball. Right? Esau is described as an earthly man. He was a hunter. He was a man of the field. Okay? We're going to find out that Esau was not one aligned or inclined to lean towards the spiritual aspects of the world. He was all about the flesh. Okay? His decisions were made in the here and now of the here and now. We will find out that Esau, who was called in the Bible, they refer to him as smooth, which means hairless, you know.
Jacob was smooth.
Jacob.
Esau was hairy.
Hairy, right. Jacob was a smooth one, right? But he was also one that he kind of hung around the house. He was a softer, gentler man.
Mama's boy.
He was hanging around mama's apron strings, right? And what you have is you have Esau being the apple of Jacob's eye, and Rebekah. Now, it's interesting because I got to look at this and try to look at the world as I know and say, Mom has two sons. She's going to come into this arrangement loving them equally, right? Mom's like, okay, but then as she sees a preference given and one slighted, it's like she kind of goes to the one that's been slighted because she's going to make sure they know love. And that's Jacob. And that's what you see. And what you'll see in this whole thing is you see the destructiveness of preference. The beautiful thing we have is God shows no partiality. Okay? There's no partiality with God. Rich, poor, tall, short, whatever, male, female. There's no partiality with God. But yet, humanness, we bring it in, and what do? We break things. Each parent had a favorite, and I think it's something every child could and did detect. I think there was a part of it where just living in life that if, from what we read, that Jacob had a definite preference for Esau, Jacob felt it. And there was a resentment. And Rebekah preferred Jacob over Esau. Jacob could feel it and would resent it. Okay, it's going to soon lead to trouble that was going to stay in the family. And it stayed historically in the family. And as we get into the historical books, deeper into them, Esau will keep coming back on, his descendants will come back on the page as adverse adversaries of Jacob and his people. And yet, they're brothers. But don't worry, boil it down, everybody in the world is a brother through Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And yet we still act like everybody hates everybody. And shortly after their birth, you're introduced, or sometime after birth, we're introduced to the character of the two men. What you see is Jacob is unwilling to give food he's prepared to his brother who's been out hunting, right? And he won't give it to him without what?
Birthright.
Yeah, he wants something for it. He's a manipulator. There's no grace in there. Hey, you're starving, you're feeling like you're dying. Well, I got something here, but I'm not going to just give it to you. I got it. What's the cost to me? It's lentil soup. I'll go get some more beans out of the garden, right? There's no cost to me. But he uses it to get Esau to, and here's the two words I put in there, easily and willingly sell his birthright to his brother. In verse 34 of the chapter states that after eating, it says Esau, this all it says about Esau, he went away. He didn't stop and go, wait a minute, what did I do? Or what happened? He really didn't care. It says that Esau despised his birthright, which included additional material blessings upon the death of his father. So the quick answer was he got the double blessing. So there's two boys. you divide it by 3, and Esau would get 2/3, and Jacob would get 1/3, typically. But more importantly, he would have been the spiritual leader of the family, and he would have been, because he was the older, even though by a minute or two, he would have been the one in line for Christ. But he didn't care. He had no spiritual discernment. Okay? But his only resentment came once he realized he'd been manipulated. And isn't that our human nature, that we make a decision, when we don't like the outcome, we were manipulated? It wasn't like, in this case, Jacob didn't deceive him. He may have, been cunning and all that, but he didn't deceive Esau, and Esau willingly did it. Esau was later mad at himself, but he projected his anger towards his brother Jacob. You'll see this later. He blames Jacob for what he did. Okay? Now from chapter 25, it appears that neither boy would be someone God could use. But what God had told Jacob when she was carrying the boys is that he loved and he chose Jacob. And as you see Jacob's life unfold, God's choice, which will seem likely hard to understand as we watch it, and I wonder how many times we look at our lives and say, how could God choose me? Eventually, we're going to see that God actually made the right choice. It's, although he was rejected at birth, Esau was, okay, it is not until 2,000 years later that we have Malachi 1 where he says, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. Well, he didn't say that when they were in the womb. He said that after 2,000 years of history, saying that's why I made the choice. Jacob was accepted and Esau was rejected. And again, if you know the story of Esau, God made the right choice. Esau never shows any true inclination towards God. He shows himself in a human nature of himself. What's in it for me here and now? Right? Because one of the things as a believer, as a child of God, you should be making choices dictated on what God has in the future. You don't necessarily know, but what you do know is God says, I don't want you to sin, because with sin comes judgment. Okay? God says, I want you to live for me. And if you take the hurt, if you do the right thing, even though it hurts, if there's a cost to you, God says, I'll take care of you for doing the right thing. Well, Esau would never be one that. He was never one to engage in that. He would never deny himself for the bigger picture of what God wanted. Chapter 26 went back to the life of Isaac, and he established his residency in Gerar, Gerar. And God appeared and said, don't go down to Egypt, stay in the land. And while he's there, Isaac repeats the same mistake of his father with the same guy, King Abimelech. He takes Rebekah and says, she's my sister. She was his cousin. She wasn't his sister. But she was his wife. And again, I want you to just kind of think of it. Try to put yourself there. Here's Abimelech. He's got Abraham in the land saying, I'm God's man. And he gets lied to. And he kind of makes him go, huh? Well, then comes along Isaac and repeats the sin of his father. He does the same thing. Okay? And it's the kind of thing where, you got Abimelech going, what's going on with these guys? Because it was foreign to who they were, which is really a scary indictment for us as believers when we're willing to do things that the world refuses to. Right? Paul talks about that in the Corinthians, where things were going on in the Corinthian church. He says the pagans don't even do that. And you guys are accepting it? Now, when Isaac's deception is discovered, Abimelech protects the two of them. He basically says, nobody touch these two. Because, see, God came to Abimelech and said, hey, you touch her, you're dead. All of you are dead. And he goes, I'm not doing him. He lied to me. He goes, yeah, I know. So he confronts him. And, again, Isaac has to learn a lesson there. What we see is he starts to move around. They say, you know what, you stay in the land. As he does, he grows. And they start saying, you know what, you're too big for us. Go away. Go away. And it is actually an interesting thing. You see Isaac, he will dig wells. And as he digs the wells, these people come and say, it's our well. And he moves away. He digs a well. They say, that's our well. Isaac is not a fighter. He's a man of peace. It's not worth it to him. He says there's plenty of land. It's kind of like Abraham told Lot, you go wherever there's plenty of land. I'm going to go wherever. It takes like 3 times, but he ends up at Beersheba. He settles there. And I kind of take it that's where God wanted him, and that's how God got him there, through conflict. And I can tell you in life, sometimes God uses conflict to move us to where he wants us to be at, right? And so he ends up at Beersheba, and God appears to him, and God repeats his blessings to him and encourages him. It's pretty interesting to me. Isaac, we have a very short story on Isaac, really. But Isaac's a man of peace. He doesn't have Lot to contend with. He doesn't have to go save people from the kings. He doesn't have to deal with Sodom and Gomorrah. He doesn't go 100 years without a child. He's a man of peace. And he's a man who trusts God. If you remember, Rebekah was barren, he prayed. God heard him and gave him his son. Isaac now, they have the 2 children. I mean, Isaac has his son, Jacob and Esau. At the end of chapter 26, you get another picture of this lack of spirituality or spiritual understanding on the part of Esau. He marries 2 Hittite women, and that really irritates mom and dad. That's all it says. It grieved them. They weren't happy. Verse 27, we're going to come into Jacob through the end of chapter 36. We'll probably just get it introduced today. What's interesting to me was for the lack of spiritual understanding of Esau that we've seen, the picture of Jacob in chapter 27 isn't any more flattering. That's the thing to me. You know, we kind of look and say, oh yeah, God got Abraham, but wow, that's a pretty good guy. I mean, for the whole thing, I mean, Abraham looks like top shelf stuff, right? And then we get to Jacob and we're going, how's God going to use this guy? Right? It's kind of like a human nature. Like, he looks like a real riffraff. Like, why would God choose Jacob? Well, sometimes you ought to look in the mirror and ask yourself the same question. Right? The chapter 27 is not very flattering. However, over the next 7 chapters, what we're going to see is God working in and through Jacob and through his life, and we're going to start to get glimpses of something that was in Jacob for God that was not in Esau. Okay? Now, he's still who he is. But we start to get glimpses of an awareness of the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac in Jacob's life. And God does appear to Jacob. There's no record of God appearing to Esau. But he appears to him. As well as we will see Esau's ungodly and worldly character continue to unfold. More is revealed. The pictures are open for us. What we're really seeing is, God makes declarations back here, and then the historical record shows us that God was not capricious in he made his decision based on knowledge. Knowing the future. By this point, Isaac is aged. And here's again the problem in the family with preference. Isaac is aged, says he can't see, which is important. Okay? And what it does, and again, I may be reading in this, but I don't think so. Jacob calls Esau, who's his favorite, and says, I'm about to die. Before I die, I want to give you the blessing. Pause. What did God tell Rebekah? The blessing was to go to Jacob. That's what God said. They're twins. They're not older like Ishmael and Isaac. They're minutes apart. And Jacob's like, go out and get me something, make me something to eat so I can enjoy it, and then I'm going to bless you. Rebekah hears this, and she goes, wait a minute. You're going to give Esau the blessing. God said it goes to Jacob. He's my favorite. And you see the conniving going on. And Rebekah comes up with this plan. She tells Jacob, go get 2 goats out of the flock. Let's make a dinner for your dad. You take it in. And little glimpse. Jacob's like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm going to deceive my father? And Rebekah says, you just do what I tell you. We're going to put hair on your arms and on your neck. And we're going to she puts Esau's clothes on him. So Jacob, he says, Isaac says, you sound like Jacob, but you're telling me you're Esau. Come close. And he smells the clothing. It's Esau's. he still hears a voice and he can't see, so he holds his hand. And then he finally says, well, come close so I can kiss you. When he does, he holds his neck. And he finds out, oh, this is the hairy one, so this must be Esau. And in it, again, as you look at it, you see that Esau gives the full blessing, everything to Esau, so he thinks. But what he does is he gives it to Jacob. And Jacob, it says literally, as Jacob kind of went out the door on the left, Esau came in on the right. And Esau says, hey, I'm here. And he's like, and it says Jacob shook. He realized he'd been duped. And he wants to know what's going on. And then Esau says, my brother deceived you and stole my birthright. And then he says, do you have anything for me? And what's the answer? Nothing. See, it's funny. I just read that and said, well, if Isaac had blessed Jacob, if his intent had been to be equitable and fair, he'd have held something for Jacob. But he was thinking he was giving it to Esau. He wanted to give everything. He wasn't going to give Jacob anything. As it turned out, Jacob got everything. Esau got nothing. Now, I picked up another thing here that despite her grand plans and thinking that she was helping God out, Rebekah is going to rue her decision as soon as it comes out. Much like Sarah and Hagar, like once it happened, she hated that Sarah made the suggestion to Abraham. And she later blamed Abraham. In this case, Rebekah, she tells Jacob, who has reservations, to do it. Just go do it, shut up and do it. But what happens is she finds out now that Esau has, through the grapevine, is going to kill. As soon as Jacob dies, Esau is going to kill Jacob. As soon as Isaac dies, Esau is going to kill Jacob. And so she contrives another plan, says, let's send you back to Laban, my brother, for a little while till he settles down over here. And what happens is she never sees her favorite son again. We have no record that he ever was able to come back to his mother. It's just the case where man tries to help God out in his plans that usually will backfire. You have that. I see that Isaac, knowing the blessings were to go to Jacob, tried to help, do his thing. Say, well, we'll give it to Esau, and then, God will figure it out. And then you have Rebekah saying, well, I'm going to make sure it happens, and she does it her way, and it doesn't work out. Let's see. Jacob departed, and again, I want to just end with this one, with 28. Jacob departs and went back to Haran, where his family's from. And as he went to get a bride, that was the pretense, Esau saw that pleased his father, that's where he was going. So instead of a Hittite, Esau went out and married a daughter of Ishmael, trying to garner favor with his dad. Again, totally missing the point, being very, very fleshly, very physical, not spiritual at all. When Jacob departed, this is really important, as he got on the way, he spent the night and he put his head on a rock, which I don't get, but he did it. And he had a vision, and it's a very important vision. It was a vision of a ladder and the angels of God ascending and descending into heaven, from heaven. And at the top was the Lord, and the Lord spoke to Jacob, and he made him he repeated the promises of Abraham and Isaac. And he says that when Jacob awoke, he realized what he didn't know was God, the Lord was in this place. He built an altar, and he kind of made somewhat of a vow, but it really was a negotiated agreement with God. It's kind of funny if you read it. You really see his human character there, and I think it's good because we oftentimes as Christians still, we talk with God and we kind of work in the flesh is still in there when we're trying to be spiritual. He says, I'm going to make a vow to serve God, but God, I'm going to serve you if you'll protect me, if you'll feed me, you'll put clothes on me, and you bring me back safely, then you're going to be my God. God, I think in heaven goes, got it. Right. He's already made the promises. They're not dependent upon Jacob. They're dependent upon God's promise. But Jacob realizes God's in there. And he starts to have an awareness that I don't think he really possessed to this point when he says God is in this place. And then he leaves, and then he goes on. We'll pick up with 29 through 33 and the reading for next week, because we're right on time. And I got to get ready for our meeting after church today.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and pray. Lord, we thank you for your word and the picture we have of even who the men and the women we see in the Bible, we think highly of and revere them as you do, as you call them out in the book of Hebrews. We see their humanness. And it's an encouragement to us that even they, in their failings, are used of you. And that despite whatever failings we may have, that Lord, being your children, you still love us. You're still always working with us and in us to conform us into the image of Christ. And we pray, Lord, that these words that we've studied this week will help to do that. Help us, Lord, to be like Christ and exemplify Christ to a lost world. For it's in his name we pray. Amen. Thank you, everybody.